So, thanks to the IMAX Fan First Batman event, I managed to see the new Batman movie a few days early, and yeah, it's good. Like, scarily good. Now, don't worry, I'm not gonna delve into spoilers in this video. I might do a more in-depth video going into spoilers another time. But just for now, I'm gonna focus on the more general things that I liked and disliked. So I'll get straight into it and start with the characters and the actors' performances. Every single performance in this movie is very strong. From Robert Pattinson's Batman, who has a very dark and gritty tone around him, and who may even slightly top Christian Bale, to the side characters like Jeffrey Wright's Jim Gordon, who offers a sort of like a good cop role and a good cop, bad cop sort of dynamic with Batman. And then you have Colin Farrell's Penguin, who by the way is completely unrecognizable in this movie. His performance is great, and he actually has kind of a larger role than I initially thought he'd get in this movie, which I liked. Zoe Kravitz's Catwoman was also really good. I liked the chemistry she had with Robert Pattinson, and I really liked that they kind of fleshed her out and made her more than just a love interest for Batman. Because up until now I haven't really been a fan of any of the on-screen Catwomans, but I'm glad that's changed. But for me, Paul Dano as the Riddler really shines the most here, even though his actual time on screen is kind of limited. Every time he does show up, he instantly just grabs your attention and steals the show. And in my opinion, this is probably the second best on-screen Batman villain that we've had to date, right under the Joker. He sort of plays like a chilling yet realistic version of the Riddler that we just haven't seen before on the big screen. No offense, Jim Carrey. He's just so frightening. Not only when he's interacting with other characters in the movie, but also when he's just, hiding in the back of a frame or creeping around in the shadows of Gotham. Now obviously, the Riddler isn't that much of a physical force to stand toe-to-toe against Batman. He's more of a mental and psychologically driven villain, which I think is perfect for a year 2 Batman story, because Bruce is still figuring out what it truly means to be Batman, and he manages to bring Bruce on a really well done character arc that I honestly never expected. His character seems to draw big inspiration from the real life Zodiac killer from the late 60s, which would then kind of go without saying that this movie and David Fincher's Zodiac are decently similar. I'd also throw maybe Seven and Saw in there as well. That's because at heart, this movie is more of a detective movie. Now we've seen detective elements sort of thrown in and out of most Batman movies, but this is the first one where I can say the mystery and detective work truly takes the center stage. Now, like I said earlier, the Riddler himself may not be a physical opponent, but that doesn't mean that this movie is shy of action, because it certainly does have its moments. The great choreography and camera work almost gives it kind of a John Wick kind of feel, and I like how each character kind of has their own unique fighting style. And although this movie is PG-13, the action here kind of does push those boundaries. Like when Batman hits, he really hits hard, like he's not afraid of pulling his punches. Also, something else that I want to mention is that Matt Reeves being behind the camera for this movie just works so well. He makes Gotham, a fictional city, feel lived in and gloomy and dirty and grimy. He manages to continue the dark and gritty tone that is in the story and implements it nicely into the visuals. Not to mention that pretty much every single shot in this movie looks amazing. It's all framed and set up and lit perfectly, and this to me is definitely up there when it comes to the best superhero movie, like in terms of cinematography. And alongside great visuals comes great audio. Like, I'm really pleased to say that Michael Giannacci's score is an instant classic. It does a great job at bringing you into the movie, and it can make you feel as if you're part of the action. Like, I'm not even joking when I say this is probably the best Batman score that we've ever had. Like, this to me is the definitive Batman soundtrack. But with all that being said, this movie isn't perfect. I do have just a few negatives and kind of nitpicks in there. Most of them are to do with time allocation. This movie clocks in at 3 hours, and although it doesn't feel 3 hours long, I still feel like the script could have been tightened up just a little bit in some areas to make time for some more scenes with other characters such as Alfred, and maybe even non-Batman Bruce Wayne, because we don't see a lot of Bruce Wayne in this movie, outside of the costume. We mainly see him as Batman. Now, another little nitpick that I have with this movie is that the third act kind of takes a more comic booky direction, leaving behind the ultra realistic elements that had been set up by the previous 2 acts. But this is a superhero movie, so it doesn't really bother me too much, because they're pretty much all guilty of sacrificing a little bit of realism for the sake of a dramatic finale. But that's pretty much all my complaints. In terms of how this movie compares to other Batman movies, I used to think that the Nolan trilogy were the best 3 Batman movies, but my top 3 now probably looks more like this. And in terms of a number rating, I'd probably have to go for a 9 out of 10 on this one. I really couldn't recommend it enough for both mainstream fans and also just general cinema fans. But yeah, that's it. If you enjoyed, then feel free to leave a like, subscribe, stay tuned on whatever I'm doing next. See ya.